Hello and welcome to China Now. China Now is a show dedicated to providing the world with an overview of today's China. Here, you'll learn about how China works, how China thinks, and how China views itself and the world. The first section of the show is China Current. We'll have Chris from China breaking down some of the most trending stories happening in China at the moment for you, to introduce you to some of the most heated discussions about social issues happening in China right now. And next, the second section, Threshold, will have Lisa explain to you some of the most cutting-edge technological innovations in today's China, to give you a glimpse of what China has been up to in the field of science and technology as a rising global power. Without further ado, let's get started.
China Current is a weekly news talk show from China to the world. We cover viral news about China every week and also give you the newest updates on China's cutting-edge technologies. Let's get started. Okay, so we want our show to be a little window to today's China, but if you really want to take a peek into China's future, you might want to see The Wandering Earth 2. A Chinese sci-fi blockbuster premiered recently. And besides China, it's currently available in countries like the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, and will come to emerging markets like Korea, Indonesia, Russia, the Middle East, and Africa. As of 5th February, The Wandering Earth 2 has collected more than 3 billion yuan, or $500 million, making it one of the top earners in China's film history. This is remarkable because it's uncommon for a sequel film, or in this case, a prequel, to perform just as well or even better than the original, as filmgoers need to be familiar with the backstory to be able to fully enjoy it. It wouldn't be much of a barrier if you are into stuff like drone battles, artificial intelligence, and nuclear explosions. The film hits all the right spots and will immediately suck you in. But, I'm not an avid sci-fi fan. Call me superficial, but I personally prefer fantasy thrillers, peppered with old-school fistfights or ancient battle scenes with men cut each other down with swords. But still, I highly recommend this film. Why? 4 reasons. First, it offers a glimpse of the Chinese mind. Humanity facing apocalyptic disasters has been an eternal fountain of inspiration for science fiction. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of books and films featuring a similar setting. But more often than not, they feature elements of messianism. In other words, the world is saved by the chosen few. Or it is beyond saving, then those few will be charged with the mission to preserve the seeds of hope on behalf of the entire human species. The key difference lies in the angles of how history is viewed. We Chinese people tend to see it from below, not from above. It's not that we don't respect heroes, but our faith lies with man, not God, or godlike individuals. The mentality is that we could be powerless on our own, but collectively we can move mountains, or pull the earth away from its orbit. Such an amazing feat would demand effort and sacrifice from all, so much so that personal tales become less important. This is precisely why many Western viewers find the storyline of Wandering Earth a little messy, plot rhythm poorly paced, major characters underdeveloped, lacking credible motives. At 3 hours long, the film does get a bit tiring, especially for those watching a franchise for the first time. So that's all very fair criticism for a commercial film. But if you reimagine it as a historical documentary made in the distant future about our near future, exactly as the Hugo-winning author of the original novel Liu Cixin had intended, perhaps its aloofness would become understandable. And all of those meticulous yet seemingly redundant labels of time, people, places, and even equipment will start to make sense. Instead of allowing the story to explore the personal, delving into their emotional depths, what matters the most is answering the 5W1H questions. The film is little more than a record of who's doing what at what time and where, resembling analytic historiography. Foreign audience may get a little uncomfortable with this narrative style, but we find it familiar. a lot of Chinese history books, even literary classics, such as the Romans of Three Kingdoms, are written in this form. Also, this film is premised on an alternative, very Chinese concept of home. Frank Guo, the director of Wandering Earth, remembers being asked by an American producer, "Why would you take the Earth with you when you're trying to escape, especially if there's a huge crisis out there?" The answer to that question, I think, lies in our connotation of home. Unlike nomadic or seafaring nations, the Chinese civilization had become and remained largely sedentary for millennia. We attach so much emotional value to the actual land we dwell upon that our sense of belonging becomes rooted in geography. Home is more than the nuclear family, even more than the sum of all kinship bonds. It's in the creeks, the trees, the streets of our hometowns. The community, the memory, all form a part of our spiritual being. There is no manifest destiny for us to emigrate to a new promised land, so our best shot facing total destruction will be carrying our homes on our backs just like snails. So I'm actually quite pleased to see The Wandering Earth striking a good balance between the epic and the romantic, the two cultural and spiritual cores of the Chinese nation. And secondly, I think it reflects the epochal change in China's comprehensive power. No point bragging about something and taking a part in, but despite being a very popular genre, science fiction, especially of hardcore nature, is not something that every country is capable of producing. I consider it to be the crown jewel of all fiction. Why? Because imagination is not chimeric fantasy, but an ability to mentally extrapolate beyond what is known and normal. Therefore, needs to be firmly grounded in reality. Anyone is free to cook up stories about space adventures, but you wouldn't know what it takes to make those stories sound credible to trained ears. Technical details could easily give you away, degrading the whole thing to a second-rate melodrama. And in the case of The Wandering Earth, the aesthetics place such a heavy emphasis on showing the nuts and bolts of all those massive infrastructure projects to the point of becoming a little fetishistic. Think about the planetary engines or the space elevator, and you'll realize that even if the science part is merely a vehicle of expression for the fiction part, it's what sets the genre apart from other forms of cultural products that require less scientific and engineering knowledge to make. And more interestingly, if the society hadn't already moved into a high-tech stage, there wouldn't be a huge demand for hardcore sci-fi, and people wouldn't be able to cultivate a good taste for sci-fi works. So the very fact that China's young generation overwhelmingly loves the film speaks volumes about how far we had come and how much further we can possibly go. In this regard, I'm really glad that, and brings me to the third point about how the film's reception in China informs us of the advent of a new, stereotype-defying, forward and outward-looking generation. Up till now, China's vision of an idealized self has stemmed from the restoration of the past. Think of government slogans such as the Great Rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, frequently interpreted as seeking to return to a rightful place in history. Western China hand would immediately think of the ancient tributary system and be cautious about its geopolitical ambitions. But actually, it's our intellectual tradition to dream up the present after the past that is deemed to be uncorrupted, virtuous, and eternal. We lived in the memory of the good old days of the ancient dynasties, the grandeur of Tang, the glory of Han, the rights of Zhou, and the governance of even more ancient sage kings. That's essentially to make China great again. But this habit is not distinctively Chinese. The Arabs, the Persians, the Turks, when they dream of an ideal world, they look back to a bygone golden age. The only exception used to be the West, who had been propelled by rounds of industrial revolution enabled by progress in science and technology to constantly expand the frontier of civilization. Only the West, especially America, equipped with state-of-the-art tools, was able to walk its way confidently without blessing and burden of history. The rest of the world could only kill their envy with vain pride, hoping to retreat to the past to lead an idyllic life or to fight injustice as a knight errant. That was teenage me being carried away by wuxia novels, but I didn't grow an interest in sci-fi literature back then because most stories were poorly written, shallow, and irrelevant. It says a thing or two about the general development level of society if boys are less interested in laser guns and gravity cannons than spears and arrows. But China has quickly, in a matter of decades, risen from an agrarian society to an industrial power. Such a great transformation paved the way for a cultural shift. Emboldened by national progress, Chinese teenagers and young adults are much more future-facing in imagining their roles in the new world. They're no longer satisfied with books and films featuring kung fu masters, royal concubines, or court intrigues. In a popular saying among the Gen Z of China, they will set out to conquer the sea of stars. There they have it, the Wandering Earth series, a space epic with Chinese characteristics tailored to their liking. The sheer audacity of the film reminds me of many sci-fi landmarks that it pays tribute as the story unfolds. It's not hard to see that in recent decades, the bulk of Western sci-fi had turned increasingly introspective in their overarching themes. It's not uncommon to find skeptical, cynical, or even dystopian view of technology and more nuanced probe of human nature. Actually, the original novel of The Wandering Earth has a mockingly tragic ending, and I happen to like it very much. I suspect the future film adaptation will depart from the novel in a major way, but most likely fans will still be pleased. In a way, China is like a new kid on the block, excitingly waving his impressive toys, anxiously trying to prove himself. Criticize what you like, but ultimately, we all need youthfulness and optimism to move humanity forward. And that leaves me with the final point, the surrealism of the film. For me, it's quite clear that many sci-fi masterpieces, Dune, Avatar, and Interstellar, just to name a few, strongly allude to Western history and the religion. So those stories naturally seep into viewers' consciousness to echo with what they already know. Just as Isaac Asimov once remarked, sci-fi is the reaction of human beings to changes in science and technology. And the flip side of the coin is, it's the same old human beings. You don't find the characters' emotion and choices drastically different from what we see every day. And the lack of strangeness and surprise is usually made up by high-tech environment. However, The Wandering Earth is nothing like that. I'm reluctant to actually use the word human fiction rather than science fiction, but what I find most surreal about the story has nothing to do with the technical feasibility of moving the Earth or anything like that. It comes from the improbability of human race coming together to solve a common crisis and be willing to be held accountable for our future generations 2,500 years down the way. Hey, we couldn't even deal with COVID when at the beginning all it required was enforcing a 2-week-long quarantine. And look at the international solidarity in the film presents and how countries brutalize each other in real life. The more unbelievable I find about the Wandering Earth story to be, the more humbled and hopeful that I become. The film is such a powerful reminder of the possibility that better versions of ourselves exist, just like aliens. With that, I thank you for watching this episode of China Currents. If you want to learn more about China or have any thoughts and comments on our show, please contact us at the email address below. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, I'm Lisa, and this is Threshold in China, a segment that gives you a taste of the future before it actually happens. I'm going to talk about emerging technologies that have life-changing potential and assess their ability to influence our life in the near future. Our show today will be slightly different to the usual routine. Normally, we focus on cutting-edge research that already exists in the lab, but today we apply our threshold skill to rate these various technologies featured in sci-fi movie. The Wandering Earth 2, the prequel to the 2019 blockbuster The Wandering Earth, has been a big hit in China and other released areas since February. The sci-fi movie received an 8 on IMDb. The eye-catching special effect and the futuristic technologies featured in the movie have been the topic of heated discussion on social media. Some of them are closer to reality than you might think. Today, I'll walk through each of these novel technologies, starting from the most realistic to those only a few steps away from us, and finally to those that are pure science fiction for the foreseeable future. Spoiler alert, just in case you haven't seen it yet. So let's begin with the first one, the exoskeleton. The exoskeleton worn by the soldiers in the movie were not props or costumes, they're actually commercial products donated by ULS Robotics. It is a Shanghai-based startup founded in 2018. The upper body exoskeleton robot featured here is type MAPSE. According to the company's website, it provides up to 10 kg of assistance to its user when they are carrying heavy loads. It reduces shoulder fatigue and prevents work-related injuries. It's fully electric-driven and its battery lasts about 5 hours. The company also makes weights and lower body models too. The latter can help a user walk while carrying a load up to 50 kg. In fact, the lower exoskeleton model is already used in elderly mobility assistance. I have no doubt that in 35 years from now, the market and the technology will be more mature and there will be more advanced exotechnology to help with the movement hindrance of the human body. It looks like the direction of robotic research and development is gradually shifting from human-machine collaboration to human-machine integration. And exoskeleton technology is moving from military into commercial market. It seems like semi-robotics may become a norm in the future. By one account, the global market value for exoskeleton robots is projected to be approximately $4.2 billion by 2028, growing at a 23% compound annual growth rate from 2022 to 2028. It's a huge market with high growth potential. Well, if we have to rate these exoskeletons from the movie using our scale, it would get a 5 on readiness dimension as it's already available on the market today, and 3 on novelty. Its potential influence is contingent on a number of factors such as affordability, production capacity, user experience, and battery life. The movie has certainly provided an excellent market opportunity for ULS Robotics. At this moment, I will give it a 3 in this dimension and see what awaits in the future. Now let's talk about the space elevator. To get to the moon by elevator is nothing new in sci-fi, but did you know that some researchers are actually working to make this science fiction dream come true? A space elevator is a vastly more economical way than rockets to travel to low Earth orbit. Today, recreational space travel remains a joyride reserved for only the world's super rich. In the commercial space travel industry, it costs around $20,000 for every kilogram of payload. That means a 70-kilogram adult would need to pay $1.4 million. By contrast, the cost of carrying every kilogram by elevator is $200, so I guess somewhat more affordable. Of course, the biggest value of space elevator isn't consumer space tourism, but rather the ability to put satellite payloads into low Earth orbit at a lower cost compared to rocket-based delivery. That said, building an elevator to the moon is too big of a step to take. Currently, scientists want to start with an elevator to the space station. The space station is much closer to us, at just 400 kilometers above the Earth, but also the space station is in a geosynchronous orbit. This geosynchronous orbit is an orbit that surrounds the equator of the Earth. Payloads in this orbit stay relatively to the Earth. They rotate with the Earth. That means that if you drop a cable from the station, it won't get tangled up or get dragged or pushed as a result of relative movement between it and the Earth. And more importantly, the force of gravity and centrifuge reach a fine balance on this orbit. Those two forces compete with one another. Below geosynchronous orbit, gravity wins, and beyond it, centrifugal effect wins. These forces gave the cable maximum tension, and that requires the cable to be made with material whose specific strength is roughly 50 times of steel. Unsinkable as it might sound, scientists have in fact found such material: carbon nanotubes. This is a tube made of carbon with diameters typically measured in nanometers. On the wall of such nanotube, carbon atoms are arranged into hexagons, which gave the material very high strength. In ideal conditions, the strength of carbon nanotube can reach 800 gigapascals. This approximately is the strength of diamonds. And one of the biggest challenges today is making nanotube long enough to be constructed into cables stretching at least 400 kilometers. To this date, scientists only succeeded in making it into a few meters long. So we're still many years away from taking our first ride in a space elevator. By the way, there's an interesting tidbit outside the movie. The China Aerospace Science and Technology Corporation expressed the support for the Wandering Earth 2 on Weibo and said by 2045 the construction of Sky Ladders, Earth Station and Space Station is expected to become a reality. Maybe we can expect something in our lifetime. If we have to rate these ongoing space elevator projects, which are invariably at a very early age, I mean a 1 for readiness, 4 for novelty, and 4 for potential influence. In addition to the space elevator, the real high-tech star in the movie is the 550 series of quantum computers. The movie highlights the capabilities of quantum computers. For example, it helped humans to complete the construction of multiple planetary engines in a short period of time. It also played an important role in the film's climax connecting the global planetary engines. The later model of quantum computers even enabled uploading of minds to have a digital afterlife. Quantum computers have been built in the labs during the last few years by scientists around the world, like Google's Sycamore and USTC's Jiuzhang. In 2019, IBM launched their first circuit-based commercial quantum computer, Q System 1. It has to be housed in an airtight glass cube with a controlled environment, so you can't carry it around like they did in the movie, nor would it withstand the harsh environment of the moon. In reality, the closest thing to a laptop quantum computer is Gemini, built by a Shenzhen-based startup called SpinQ. From the outside, SpinQ doesn't look very different from a common desktop in size and design. It weighs 55 kilograms and has a volume of less than 0.3 cubic meters and costs less than $50,000. The IBM Q System 1 contains a 20-qubit quantum processor, while the Gemini only has a 2-qubit. But it might just be enough for its stated goals. In a research paper published by the startup in 2021, SpinQ's Gemini aims to provide hands-on experience for teaching quantum computing at all levels from K-12 to the college level. Technically, whether it's a large quantum computing prototype or a teaching machine like the SpinQ Gemini, no quantum computer has yet achieved the expectations of scientists' ideas, and both China and the United States have only reached the first stage of their goals. The aim of scientists is to build a quantum computer of practical value within 5 to 10 years. Truly creating a general-purpose quantum computer like the omnipotent Moss in the movie may have to wait even longer. But this is currently one of the world's most heavily invested fields of science and technology, so progress is constantly happening. At present, we gave SpinQ Gemini a 5 in readiness, 3 on novelty, and as to potential influence it remains to be seen, so a 3. All of the technologies we've discussed so far are more or less work in progress, but with this last one, scientists don't even agree on where to start. At the moment, uploading your mind into the digital world is still purely science fiction. The main reason is that there is no clear consensus among neuroscientists as to what consciousness is and where it is in the brain. There are cognitive scientists who believe the so-called consciousness is actually a user interface in our brain, just like what we see on the screen of a computer. We don't know what is going on behind the screen when we press the buttons, but we don't need to know either, as long as the machine functions well. So a question inevitably arises: can we upload our consciousness without knowing exactly what it is? Although the movie itself don't reveal much on how the characters did it, one of the science advisors of the movie shared their idea behind this concept during an interview. To upload consciousness, one has to first record it with as much detail as possible. It basically entails recording the brain activity with electroencephalogram (EEG) while making a series of snapshots of all the neuron connections in the brain. This would require the user to wear some EEG headset continuously and frequently during a prolonged period of time and lie in the brain scanning machine from time to time. It indeed is a well-imagined approach, but it is somewhat impractical for today's standards. The brain's cognitive function relies largely on the connection of neurons. For this reason, neuroscientists have developed an approach called connectomy to detail this map of neuron connections. But recording a person's connectomy alone might not be enough. Just as road map don't tell you what car is on the road, connectomy don't provide any information about the pattern of electric communications among neural connections. In other words, it doesn't record how a brain uses these connections to convey messages. Current EEG technology has its limitations. It can't zoom in and tell you what's happening in any individual neural connection. But for recording memory or consciousness, understanding what's happening on a given neural connection is crucial. So far, scientists have no way to observe the behavior of individual connection on a living human brain. They have only observed it on neuron growing on Petri dish. Beyond this, there are also some evidence showing that the substance within the neurons are at least equally important for forming memory. In 2018, scientists transplanted mRNAs in the neurons of one senile to another and found that the recipient seniles acquired the memory of the donor. Given there are too many unknowns in neuroscience, especially the inner working of our minds and consciousness, digital afterlife remains a thing for the distant future, and it's uncertain as to whether we will ever achieve something alike. Since we have currently no viable path to a digital afterlife, there is no point in rating it. But as a sci-fi idea is becoming more and more common. Not long ago, Elon Musk said on his Twitter account that he has already uploaded his brain onto the cloud, without revealing much detail, and caused much speculation and ridicule. In the foreseeable future, perhaps with advance in neuroscience and digital technologies, news about attempts to upload minds will make headlines from time to time and continue to capture our imagination. However, as it is indicated in the movie, the uploading of consciousness to supercomputers such as 550W doesn't necessarily bode well for humans. Uploading consciousness may give the computer a human face, as it now goes by the personified name Moss, 550W spun upside down. In the movie, the sentient Moss claimed responsibility for both the past two world-ending crises as well as several yet-to-come future crises. This invited lively discussion on internet, just as recently the arrival of ChatGPT has stormed the world. The conversational AI seems to be capable of doing many things. It no longer appears cold and rigid as most chatbots, and it even gives you the illusion of having a human touch. Our reactions and feelings are mixed, excitement of this new tool on the one hand and anxiety about unemployment on the other. Although the intelligence level of current AI is nowhere near that of Moss, the disruption they bring about is real and comprehensive. We can rest assured that for now, AI is not going to have consciousness anytime soon, whether by uploading it or by any other ways, since artificial general intelligence is still in its early stages. The relevant question is, how can we have a positive symbolic relationship with the ever more powerful AI so that we can ride the tide of technological improvement to the new heights of human progress? What we talked about today are just a few of the novel technology featured in Wandering Earth 2. What scenes of scientific progress captured your imagination in this film? If you like this change to our show, are there any other scientific films that you would like us to dive into? As usual, we look forward to your thoughts and feedback.
Thank you, Lisa and Chris. Now, let's turn our eyes outside the studios. Here, you may hear different voices in and about China, entrepreneurs starting their businesses from scratch, or our African friends living in China, or it could be thinkers and scholars sharing their bright ideas about China and the world. Let's keep rolling and see what's for today.
Their talk is about China. But China is not an enemy of Africa. We have never been colonized by China. China was our protector.
If one of your opponents who has a history of overthrowing your governments, who has a history of exploiting your natural resources unfairly, if that person suddenly put established military capacity in the middle of your country, how would you feel? We see it as the beginnings, in fact, the very advanced beginnings of an effort to recolonize Africa. We think that the West recognizes that Africa is increasingly moving out of their control, and they're trying to reverse that. They recognize that now, for example, there's China in terms of trading relations, in terms of financing, in terms of infrastructure support. Africa has alternatives. And I think they're worried about that. So we see the military intensification of militarization in two ways. One, fundamentally suppress our own people. The bases are directed at us to prevent insurrection, prevent rebellion, prevent the overthrow of unpopular leaders. But they're also planned and actually articulated as an effort to exclude strategic competitors?
Well, the Americans have not hidden the reasons for those bases. They have made it very clear is to protect American interests in Africa. What are the American interests in Africa? The American interest in Africa is not to protect the African people. That's not an American interest. One discernible American interest in Africa is minerals, to protect their access to strategic minerals. Today, DRC holds about 70% of the world's cobalt deposits. Zambia, which is a neighbor to DRC, also has got huge deposits. Niger holds 70% of the world's uranium deposits. DRC has uranium, Zambia has uranium, Namibia has uranium. These are strategic minerals. These are what the Americans are protecting. Protecting from who? From us, the Africans, the owners of these minerals? Certainly not. They are trying to protect, to monopolize these minerals, these strategic minerals. Protect, keep away primarily China. Their talk is about China, 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 China. But China is not an enemy of Africa. We have never been colonized by China. There's no single African country that was a colony of China. Even today, China has never colonized and is not intending to colonize an African country. China has never shown any imperial interest in Africa. China was there with us. In our liberation struggles, China supported us. When the West was colonizing us, China was helping to liberate us. China was there to defend our independence, economically and otherwise. For instance, my country, Zambia, it was blockaded. All our neighboring countries were still under colonialism. We had no access to the ports from Mozambique, from South Africa, from Namibia, from Angola. But there was no proper road, there was no rail. We asked the Americans, the British, to help us put up a rail system to the port of Dar es Salaam. They refused. President Nyerere of Tanzania came on behalf of Zambia and Tanzania to ask the leadership of China under Chairman Mao, Zhou Enlai, for help to build a rail. China at that time did not have the capacity, but China said there's no way, they have to do it. They mobilized both the human capital, the materials that were needed, the finances that were needed. It was a very difficult task. China did not have that type of rail infrastructure in its own country, but the Chinese people were ready to build that for us. And in the process, China lost 70 of its own citizens, of its own people, in the construction of that rail. The remains of those 70 Chinese people still lie in Zambia. We have 70 Chinese people buried in Zambia today. We have Chinese solidarity that will never be forgotten, that will last forever. At that time, China did not have a single mine in Africa. They did not have a single corporation operating in Africa. Not a single one. So it was selfless, noble assistance to fellow brothers and sisters. China has continued even now when it's doing well to cooperate with Africa. If you go to Africa today, you see a big hospital. 99.99% probabilities that it has been built by China. If you see a big airport today that is new in Africa, it's a very high probability that it has been built by China. If you see a rail network that is new, know that it has been built by China. You see a big bridge that is new, it has been built by China. China is there for us. Yes, there are challenges here and there, and the Chinese authorities are dealing with those challenges. And in the first place, let's not forget that our own colonization was done with military, with force, brutal force. It was maintained with brutal force. It is being continued today in a new way again with the militarization of the African continent. Whenever there is resistance to their mining interests, they have not hesitated to use the military. So part of the militarization that we are seeing of the on the African continent, one is to protect their minerals and to ensure that they enjoy the exploitation of these minerals at the exclusion of China and the others who are progressive.
And, I think that the story of the Tanzania-Zambian Railway is a very, very important one. I always get excited when I hear you talking about this, because there's a way in which I think probably younger Chinese see that as just China's investment, China's support to Africa, in the way that they see Chinese companies active in Africa today, without the context that you provided, that at that point in time, many African countries had a higher GDP per capita than China did. That it was a massive sacrifice on the part of China. It was solidarity. China didn't set up a military base as the condition for building the railway. China hasn't established any military bases around Africa. So I think that younger Chinese people may not yet have contextualized the Tanzania-Zambia Railway properly. So this was not, the current China, which is the largest economy in the world, building a railway. This was China it was the 70s or early 60s. It's an entirely different proposition, it's an entirely different context. I mean, the contrast you see, for example, the militarization, if you look in the Sahel region, in Niger, the largest drone airbase in the world is in Niger. And you mentioned the uranium mine in Niger. Now that mine alone accounts for 1/3 of France's electricity. It's one of the poorest places on earth. And they're sitting on one of the most valuable resources in the world. And next to it, you have this huge American drone base. So it is impossible for people in that area to rebel against the conditions. They're doing open pit uranium mining. The people in that area are poisoned for generations. There's a strategic resource there to protect it from Africans and also to exclude competitors like China and so on. So I really get excited when you tell that Tanzam story. It's something people need to know.
In life, it's always very important to be clear about things. And to be clear about things, sometimes it's better to understand the history. The history of things, the history of events. They are militarizing Africa today when we are not asking them to come and help us militarily. When we wanted their military assistance, they denied us. In the late 70s, mid-70s to late 70s, when Zambia was being bombarded by the apartheid regimes in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and South Africa, we had no air defenses to protect ourselves and to protect the National Liberation Forces bases. We asked the Americans to sell us air defense systems, not to grant us, but to sell us. They refused. The British also refused, including the Soviet Union, refused. The only country that came to our aid at that time was China. China gave us MiG-21s and a few tanks. And that equipment is still there today. And China did not have much at that time, but they sacrificed an entire squadron of MiG-21s and gave us.
And again, it's the same thing in Ghana. I mean, we weren't actually bombed and so on. But if you read the correspondence between the British colonial officers who then became Foreign Service officers, you read their correspondence, the person in Ghana, the person in Kenya, the person in the Home Office in London. Now, if such a person comes back and says he's building a military base, you cannot possibly think that it is in your interest.
Definitely, it's not our bases, it's their bases. And they are honest about it.
And to exclude strategic competitors.
Yes.
Yes.
Because they are not protecting us from China. China was our protector.
Yeah.
It's not only on the military front that they want to counter China. When China started the Belt and Road Initiative and infrastructure projects were started in Africa, roads, rail, and so on, they decided, in their own words, to counter China's infrastructure programs by setting up their own. That's the Europeans and the Americans. They have come up with a program of $600 billion over a period of 5 years to build infrastructure in Africa to counter China's influence. So there is nothing noble about what they want to do in Africa. There is nothing about Africa that they want to do in Africa. It's purely in their own interests, selfish interests. But we know that projects like that are not based on noble and selfless sentiments are worthless. Likewise, noble programs, noble projects that are not based or inspired by fair and correct ideas are also worthless. It's not the first time they are promising Africa this and the poor world. A few years ago, they had promised to take 3% of their GDPs to the development of the poor world. How many of them have even contributed 5% of their GDP? Near to zero. None. So we'll be very happy if this $600 billion they have promised for Africa infrastructure and investment actually materializes. And they're saying it's going to come from private and public sources. That in itself is problematic. It's problematic. It cannot be guaranteed. How can they guarantee what private investment will be? How can they guarantee? On what terms are they going to bring it in? We know private investment follows profit. So how is it going to match the Belt and Road Initiative projects? Again, everything for them is in their own interest, in their interest to counter China's influence in Africa. But what is China's influence in Africa? We have a relationship with China that will be very, very difficult to break. A friend in need is a friend indeed, they say.
Welcome back to China Now. I hope you enjoyed the show today. China Now is a show dedicated to providing the world with an overview of today's China. Here, you will learn about how China works, how China thinks, and how China views itself and the world. We hope to show you a different world, a different culture, and a different way of thinking. Let China not be far from you anymore. If you still want to know other things about China, please contact us through the email below. Thanks for watching and see you next week.